Dear viewer, I find myself in a little bit of a moral dilemma. I was contacted, asked to do an interview or an article or something, anything, for someone who is doing a Kickstarter for their game. The game is called Oceania 2084. It's an Orwellian TTRPG, kind of loosely, but not that loosely, set in the world of George Orwell's 1984. Now, this should be something that's right up my alley, right? And they're doing a Kickstarter for which they're going to spend the money on artists, which is something I can support, to add art to the game, which already has an austere edition. So the new edition will be the surplus edition. And obviously this is time sensitive, given it's under 30 days left on the Kickstarter, and so far they're not seemingly doing that well on raising the money. However, I don't actually much like their game. So, do I move forward and say that, and do I go over the game and why I don't much care for it and everything else, and therefore be a dick to another game designer, or do I do it anyway, figuring that any publicity is good publicity, right? And there are plenty of people that violently disagree with me, which may take my anti-endorsement as an endorsement. You know, I want people to send me things. I want people to come to me wanting reviews and advice and publicity, but without the trust of my audience and my own honesty and authenticity, I don't think anyone should listen to me. So I will have to be honest and authentic in looking at this project and everything to do with it. So here we go. Oceania 2084 is a game based around 1984. 1984 is a very important, very influential book about the problems of authoritarianism, whatever guise it takes, and the threat that such authoritarianism represents. I care about 1984 a great deal, and Brave New World, and Brazil, and Harrison Bergeron, and dystopias are my jam. All of these references have been debased somewhat through over-reference, particularly the last decade or two, to the point where we now have right-wing authoritarians and populists unironically invoking it when it's as much about them and their excesses and stupidities as it is anything else. They use it to attack the nanny state, which it isn't really about. The state in 1984 doesn't really care about anybody or anything, save its own power. So what we have here is a game that winds on the clock 100 years or so, and is intended as more of a toolkit for creating your own oppressive dystopia, but the emphasis is still very much on the scaffolding of Big Brother and the somewhat familiar to everybody 1984. It's a GM-less game, sort of. Players set their own agenda, create their own scenes, describe their own environment, and so on. So if you don't have proactive players, you're kind of boned. The traditional GM role is actually that of Big Brother, so this is almost an adversarial game. It takes a lot of cues from Powered by the Apocalypse and similar, so you already know what I'm going to say about that. Those kind of games aren't my jam. I don't think they're really role-playing games. They're some other kind of game. I don't think this is really a role-playing game. Rather, it is something else. In these kind of games, play takes place at that unsatisfying meta level that I so despise, and it's barely really a game at all, just an ongoing misery tour of an oppressive and unwinnable dystopia with a lot of bookkeeping, so maybe a bit closer to Brazil than 1984. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. There are story games that I like as well. There are board games and card games that I like as well, but these games aren't really role-playing games, and it's hard to really grok the appeal of such deep misery tourism. In the introduction, it mentions real-world genocides and issues that we're facing, and I'm forced to ask myself, why? Does it really need to? I don't think it does. I mean, don't tell me what your game is about. Show me what your game is about. It's hackneyed writing advice that can be bollocks, but I don't think that there is any real need to do this, to spell things out as if you're talking to a child. Use allegory, use canny game design and description, and let people make the connections and interpretations themselves. That's more effective in the long run, for all that we have seen 1984 be reinterpreted in weird ways. The game encourages you to turn away from the horror and the brutality and not describe it in detail, preferring an oppressive atmosphere. But I think you need that detail, and I think that such a game, to be effective, needs to be unflinching. It needs to represent things like the friendly, personable torturer in Brazil, or someone being randomly beaten to death by the police on the streets. Things like that are important to include and to stare at and to absorb. The game has content warnings and safety tools, which I loathe at the best of times, but which are absolutely antithetical to what this kind of game and this kind of play should be trying to achieve. It's typical of the inability to follow through on challenging ideas and themes that I see in so many modern games. Instead, they present a sort of shallow, safe edginess that isn't really edgy at all. As I say, I don't think safety tools and so on, content warnings, have any place anywhere, but especially in things like this, in horror games, or games where fear, disgust, and disquiet, the unease is the fucking point. I'm so sick of this. There is something bitterly ironic in making a game about the suppression of the human spirit, about newspeak, about the erasure of art, history, expression, and freedom, and then to venerate systems and modes of play which are themselves oppressive, suppressive, and which characterize certain forms of play or content as thought crimes themselves. Where the game really finally lost me, though, was in quoting Olivia Hill, a person very recently outed, even more than they already were, as an actual harasser, abuser, and bad faith actor in the RPG space, relying on their marginalized status as a club to bully and harangue other people, despite having previously accused plenty of other people around them of being such. And yeah, this is someone who Goldsteined me personally. Quoting them is a profoundly tone-deaf thing to do, and the quote itself, while being more Kafkaesque than Orwellian, is still horrendous. To quote Olivia Hill, as quoted in the book, "If you're a fascist, you're not welcome to play this game. It's against the rules. If you're reading this and thinking you just call everyone you disagree with a fascist, then you're probably a fascist, or incapable of drawing inferences from context and acknowledging a dangerous political climate that causes the oppressed to be hyperbolic. Don't play this game. Heal yourself, grow, learn, watch the Mr. Rogers Neighborhood or something." So, you're a fascist if you disagree with someone much closer to being an actual fascist, calling people fascists spuriously. That's a Kafka trap. That is bullying. It's thought crime. It's the least convincing argument, since someone suggested that the Bible predicted people wouldn't believe it, And so that meant it was true. Game-wise, as a character, you are defined by your social class, your moves related to that social class, your emotions, your values, national and personal, and your stress, some memories, your family, who you might end up playing a member of if your first character is executed, a handful of descriptive traits, and a deviation, something that puts you at risk from the party. Like a lot of story games, this is all very defined and restrictive. It's not necessarily out of theme with the game, but it is a definite and big obstruction to immersive roleplay. And with most of these stats being in flux all of the time, there's quite a lot of bookkeeping. While the Big Brother role is somewhat akin to a games master, it's the players who have the most control over the narrative. You won't really set a story as Big Brother, you will only react and service the needs of the players, like a whipped little bitch. There's a reason there is a Games Master crisis, and a reason why only about a sixth of the RPG audience are regular Games Masters. It's work, it's difficult, and not everybody has the hunger for it or the skill at it to do it well. You can either view this setup as an all Games Master game or a no Games Master game, both of which have massive issues when it comes to actually playing. From clashing ideas of what the story could be, to fumbling and stumbling, shitty attempts to describe stuff. There's no actual resolution mechanic per se. If you try to do something, you do it, so that requires a hell of a lot of restraint from those playing. Instead, the rolls you make may cause suspicion to build up, which Big Brother can then spend to react, and if you are making rolls, it's generally when things happen that might violate your values or invoke one of your emotions. But making the emotion statistics kind of takes out the immersion, the point, in a lot of ways. Occasionally, as Big Brother, you will be able to bring in one of the players for interrogation, and through that interrogation to expose networks, deviations, thought crimes, and so on, little petty acts of rebellion, and around it goes until everybody's dead and is playing different characters, and you can keep going even then if you want. On paper, I should like this game. I'm a left anarchist. Orwell was anti-authoritarian and very sympathetic to the Spanish anarchists. However, I don't like this game. It has all the problems of Powered by the Apocalypse games. The meta-game play level, the set moves, the highly structured and stifling rule set, the immersion-breaking bean counting, the ironically oppressive politics and safety tools and nonsense and hectoring tone of the introduction. It's either brilliant satire, making a game that is itself actually Orwellian in nature, that is ostensibly about rebelling against Orwellian authoritarianism, or it has just plain missed the mark. Now, I try not to be a pundit type and, just endlessly self-promote, but my own little GM-less game, The Little Grey Book, does much the same as this 100-page book in pamphlet form, with a much tighter focus and a lot less complexity, and, dare I say it, more effect. I don't want to be a dick about this game or project, but I do actually hate it. If I were reviewing the austere edition, I'd give it a 3 out of 5 for style. I felt that while almost all text, the book was presented fairly effectively. And frankly, I don't think it will be much improved by the addition of artwork to create the illustrated surplus edition. I did feel that the book was a little bit too clean, despite the dirty edges, and probably not retro-futuristic enough. I think it would much benefit from using typewriter typefaces and header fonts that evoke Soviet or Nazi typography. This was particularly jarring in the section about the various ministries, where the font choice kind of broke the theme, I thought. In terms of substance, there's just barely enough here. A lot is left in the air for you to define. I don't regard that as lazy game design. Some people do, but yeah, it's definitely lacking something. It's a Big Brother society, but what are they against? What are they for? What constitutes a deviation in this society, and what doesn't? I would rather have seen a deeper roleplay guidebook to the novel, setting things in that particular world more firmly, adding interpretation and additional content, with a small amount on customizing and changing the world to your own devices, rather than the other way around. So it gets a 2 from me there for substance. That's 5 out of 10, 2.5 out of 5, slightly below average. Actually, average is 6. In terms of both content and presentation, it might be for you, it's not for me. My subjective interpretation would put the game at more a 2 out of 10 or a 1 out of 5. I think it misses the point of its own themes, and I don't think it's particularly playable at least for the purposes it says it's for. You know, I'm English. I love irony, but the introduction left me reeling from the hypocrisy and the lack of self-awareness. So thanks. I hate it.
I don't often make explicitly political games, but The Little Grey Book is one of them. It's a parable about this social media panopticon we've all made, where everyone is always watching each other for anyone who steps out of line in any way. And The Little Grey Book is about the inescapability of upsetting someone. It's a one-trick pony, but it's a good one-trick pony. Available at DriveThruRPG and post-mort.com.
Down before your eyes. The actors screaming agonizing cries. Another useless reason to despise. The secret life that everyone denies. The secret life that everyone denies. The secret life that everyone denies. You're a star now. You go far now. In the Nero Daughter Show. In the Nero Daughter Show. You're on stage now. Disengage now. In the Nero Daughter Show. In the Nero Daughter Show. Nero Daughter Show.
Horrible what happened today. See, I don't like I have, okay, like a lot of you, I hate a lot, you know? But I hate with style and creativity.